morning, everybody. Welcome back to Crafting and Crime Daily. I am your host, Rebecca, and I recap live trials so you have something to listen to while you are crafting. So don't forget to hit that thumbs up button, like and subscribe the video, and hi, everybody. Welcome back to Crafting and Crime Daily. I'm your host, Rebecca, and I recap live trials so you have something to listen to while you're crafting. Today, I'm continuing with day 3, the recap of the trial of the state of Michigan versus James Crumley. He is on trial for involuntary manslaughter. If he is convicted, he could be sentenced to up to 15 years in jail. Now, his wife was convicted last month of involuntary manslaughter, and she is awaiting sentencing, which should be next month. Maybe they'll be sentenced together if he's convicted. And at this point, it's not looking good, Mr. Crumley. Although he's coming across as a more, he had way more empathy for his son, more compassion for his son that I'm seeing than I saw with Jennifer. It's his boy. So day 3 starts with the counselor, the school counselor, and then after him is the dean of school. Now, this counselor, his name was Sean Hopkins. I remember him and Mr. Ejak, the dean, testifying in Jennifer's trial. And in that trial, they came off as, by the time they got to testifying, I thought, ooh, these guys screwed up. There was stuff that they didn't respond to. They didn't insist that he be taken immediately for mental health counseling. They didn't insist that the parents take him home. They just let him go back to class, and nobody searched his backpack. And we know in that backpack was the 6-hour 9mm with 50 rounds of ammunition in his backpack. So Mr. Hopkins explained that it's his job to be an advocate for the students. He helps them pick out classes that, it's going to get them to where they want to be in the future. He helps them pick colleges. He helps them with their application. He helps with social, emotional well-being as needed to 400 of the 1,600 students in that school. He was one of 4 counselors, and they were split up by alphabet. So he happened to have the C's, I guess. So James Crumley was one of his students. He talked about the first meeting that he had with Ethan Crumley. Did I say James was one of his students? I meant Ethan. So he met Ethan on May 13th of 2021, but he does not remember this meeting. So it's a meeting that got recorded that he doesn't remember. But he said this was as a result of a teacher that emailed him and told him that Ethan was sleeping in class. Now, he testified. When you don't remember something, you can testify about what your usual practice is. Like if you make macaroni and cheese. Well, my usual process is I boil the water, but do I remember boiling the water? No, I don't remember boiling the water. So it's kind of like that. So if you got this kind of complaint, what is it you would do? And he said, I would have met with him, but I would not have called the parents. And in this case, he did not call the parents. And he said, the reason is because you want to develop a level of trust with these students. And if you're going to call the parents in every time, then they're not going to open up to you. Okay, I get that. So on December 8th of 2021, he was notified by the Spanish teacher that Ethan had written a poem. And I'm assuming it was a Spanish poem. And in this poem, he indicated that he felt terrible and that his family was a mistake. So it was because Mr. Hopkins had received this email late in the day. He says, I'm going to talk to him tomorrow. So the next day he runs into the teacher in the hall and she informs him. She goes, don't worry about it. He was just messing around with some other kids and they were just goofing off. So I'm not really concerned. So he didn't talk to him. Then on November 10th of 2021, that same Spanish teacher. She emails him again and said, Ethan is having a very rough time. So he says, I'm going to check in on him. That was his thought. So he checked in on him between classes in the hallway. Hey, how you doing? You can talk to me anytime. That was him checking in on Ethan on November 10th. On November 29th, he gets another email from a different teacher, the math teacher, who's notified him about this. This is the day before the shooting, November 29th. She notified him that Ethan was looking at bullets, purchasing bullets on his phone. So he calls Ethan in and he talks to him, and he doesn't call his parents because, again, he just wants to talk to him. And he tells Ethan, this, it's not illegal. You're not doing, you haven't broken any code of conduct, or anything like that, but it's not appropriate. It's just not appropriate as a school activity. Can you just do that somewhere else? So the next day, he gets an email about this math paper. Now, the math paper is where he draws a picture of the weapon, the 6-hour 9mm. He draws a body with blood around it. He says, I need help me. And then he crosses all of it out after the teacher takes a picture of it and sends it down she actually sent it to the dean that we're going to hear from next. But that morning, November 30th, the counselor, he's thinking, I've got to get a hold of him and talk to him about, looking up the bullets. So he goes to get Ethan out of class. And he said the reason he went instead of the dean, let me back up just a second. Before he goes to get him out of the class, the dean, who's going to testify next, goes into his office and says, there's an issue with Ethan Crumley. And he says, oh, is it the math paper? Because I guess he had just gotten the email about the math paper. And he says, yeah, it's the math paper. We need to talk to this kid. So instead of the dean going down to get him, because then everybody would have known he's in trouble, the counselor went down to get him out of class. And he said the reason being I do that all the time, and people don't really, they know it's not unusual for me to come get someone out of class. So that way it wouldn't look like, oh, this kid's in trouble. So he brings him down to the office, and then he starts to talk to him first about looking up. He was actually watching video of a shooting in class. And that's what was on his radar first. And then it was the math paper. So he talks to him. He says, we just had this conversation yesterday about doing inappropriate things during school time. And this is inappropriate. You shouldn't be watching videos of people being gunned down. And then he says, but, let's talk about this math paper. So he hands him the math paper and he says, can you explain this to me? And he says, oh, yeah, it's a video game. I want to be a video game designer. So he's like, okay, but what about these words? Help me, and he said at this point, he starts to open up to him about how sad he is that, his grandmother's died. He had a really difficult time during COVID with the virtual learning. He fell behind and he's, trying to catch up. He's sad because his dog died. Yeah, did I say that? Grandma died, dog died. It's like a country music song. I'm sorry. And his friend is gone. So at this point, this counselor is concerned. He's like, well, I don't want to leave this kid alone. Because, he's assured me he's not going to harm himself or anybody else. But I'm concerned. I don't think he should be left alone. So he calls mom. I think what he did was he asked Ethan, he says, I'd like to call one of your parents. What's your preference? He says, like, call my mom because dad's busy. And so he calls mom. And she says, okay, I'll be right down. So she's on her way. And she calls James, her husband, and then they end up both coming to the meeting, which this counselor said he was very surprised that both of them showed up, because he says that's kind of unusual. So when they come into the meeting, before they come into the meeting, while they are waiting for the parents to arrive, this counselor is showing Ethan some videos. He's like, hey, you want to watch some videos? Yeah, okay. He puts on a video of like a promotional video outlining this graphic design program that's at this technical school, and he shows it to him. And meanwhile, we're going to hear from Mr. Ejak about what he did while he was waiting for the parents. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. So his parents come in. He said that right away, James goes over to his son and starts talking to his son. Whereas Jennifer kind of sits in the back of the room, and wants to know what's this all about. And the prosecutor asked him, what was your expectation for an outcome of this meeting? And he said, I expected that they would either take him to get help that day, and he had given them a 3-page list of places where they could take him. And one of those places didn't require an appointment. They could have taken him, they could have left the school that day and just taken him there. But Jennifer's like, no, I can't do that. I have to work. We have to work. And he thought, in the alternative, maybe they'll just take him and spend some time with him, quality time with him today. Nope, got to go to work. So he said, fine. And again, at this point, Ethan is saying he wants to go back to class. And when he was trying to get Ethan's promise that he wouldn't harm himself or anybody else, Ethan says, I can see why all this looks bad, but I'm not going to do anything. Okay. So what this counselor did is he said to Jennifer and James, gave him the paper, and he says, all right, you've got 48 hours. Get him some counseling in 48 hours. And I'm going to check back with you in 48 hours. Now, his plan was to check back the following day. And then after 48 hours, if 48 hours passed and they hadn't gotten him any counseling, his plan, he was going to call Child Protective Services and report this. Obviously, the shooting happens. He doesn't report anything. And he said, his overall impression of that meeting was that he was concerned that these parents weren't really taking any action. James is interacting with his son, trying to figure out what's going on with the math paper. And mom is she's like, are we done here? Are we done here? After 12 minutes, are we done here? Yeah, you're done. Now we get the dean of students on the stand. This is Mr. Ejak. So while he was present when the counselor was talking to Ethan, about watching the video and the inappropriateness and explaining the math paper, but when the decision was made to call mom, Mr. Ejak leaves, and because Ethan had been pulled out of second period for this counseling session, but second period ended. So he had left his backpack in second period. So Mr. Ejak says, I'm going to go get your things, because their expectation was they're going to take this kid for counseling or take him home. So he goes back to the second period classroom and gets the backpack, and even makes a smart remark to somebody, hey, this is awfully heavy. But he was asked by the prosecutor, why didn't you search this backpack? He goes, well, I have to have probable cause. I have to have some reasonable belief that I'm going to find something in this backpack. And I did not have any reasonable belief or any reasonable suspicion of anything untoward being in this backpack, even though there's a picture of a Sig Sauer weapon on that math paper. He doesn't have probable cause. I have an issue with that. I'm sorry. I've always had an issue with that. I beg to differ about whether you have probable cause or not. And he says it's not unusual for these backpacks to be very, very heavy because they weren't using lockers. This was during the COVID pandemic, and they weren't using the lockers. Everybody had to carry everything in their backpack back then. So he said the math paper did not violate any code of conduct. So there was really no discipline that he could render, like he wasn't going to suspend him over the math paper. And he felt like it was more important to treat this as a psychological issue and get him some help. Yeah. So the drawings did not violate the code of conduct, and that was his testimony. So he was on the both these guys were on and off the stand pretty quickly. So the prosecution was really trying to downplay their role. And what was brought out was, you were never told that 4 days before this, his father had purchased him a weapon, a 6-hour 9mm that looked like the one on the paper. You didn't know that, did you? No. And what the prosecutor emphasizes, all that these two men knew was what they learned in the 90 minutes that they had Ethan down in that office for the counseling, and the 12 minutes mom and dad came in out of that was 90, versus James Crumbley, who's got years and the lifetime of Ethan knowing what his psychological and emotional issues are. They didn't know. So that's what they were trying to emphasize, that these guys were acting on the very limited knowledge that they had, versus James and Jennifer, who had all of this knowledge and still didn't do anything. So they were really trying to downplay the employees' role in what happened that day. And I don't think you can. I really don't think that can be ignored. So the next person on the stand is the FBI special agent. Now, he's been present in the courtroom for the entire trial, as he was with Jennifer's trial, because he's the lead FBI agent on the case. And he says they get involved anytime there's a state or local investigation of a crime involving a firearm. So he got involved in this. He arrived on the scene he said by the time he got on the scene, it was no longer an active shooter situation, but he did have an opportunity to photograph the gun. And at that point, he began tracing the gun. So he traced it back to this person. It had been registered to this person. And he contacted that person. The person said, I no longer have that gun. Here's where I sold it. I contacted that place, and they said, yes, we sold it to James Crumbley. And then he proceeded to get all the paperwork for that. Now, he reviewed everything. He reviewed all the sales of the weapons by the firearm store, and he felt like that the proper procedure was followed for each of those purchases. So he was asked to explain the different firearms, and this was at the point where the firearm exhibits were opened in the courtroom for the jury to see each one of the firearms. The Cobra, what's the other one called? It's the Cobra, the 6-hour, which is the murder weapon, and there was one more weapon. What did they call it? It has a name. Hold on. I don't know. The Kel-Tec 22. Yeah. So he's showing each one. He showed the safe that they found in he didn't call it an armoire. We know that James had said that the weapon, the 6-hour 9mm, was in the case in the armoire. So this officer was responsible for a search warrant of the Crumbley home and was present for when that search warrant was executed. The case for the 6-hour 9mm was found on James and Jennifer Crumbley's bed, next to where this armoire was. And the case was open. Inside the case, underneath the foam, was this Youth Safety Act, which I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. But also within that safe also within the armoire was a gun safe that was locked. But the combination was 000. They never set the combination on it. So it would have been very easy to get into that. Now, there was no ammunition near these guns, but within that safe was the Kel-Tec and the Cobra weapon. So obviously he had taken the 6-hour 9mm. Now he pointed out that the case that came with the 6-hour 9mm, it's capable of, you can put a lock on that case, but it wasn't. And he also pointed out that the gun cable lock had never been used. And on cross-examination, the defense attorney said, well, what makes you think it never been? Maybe they used it and just put it back in the package. He goes, no. He goes, once you take that thing out of the package, you'll never get that thing back in the package. It stretches out, and you wouldn't get it back in without tearing up the package. That thing had never been used. So I said I was going to get back to this youth handgun safety pamphlet that came with the gun. And he testified, this FBI agent testified, that just before his testimony against Jennifer Crumley, in her case, he found that pamphlet underneath the foam insert that was in the case of the 6-hour 9mm. And that kind of surprised him. And I'm not sure why he would be surprised. And neither was the defense counsel. She said, listen, I mean, he bought 2 other guns. Didn't you say that this comes with every gun? Maybe he read it several months ago when he bought the other guns, and he didn't need to read it again. You don't need to post it anywhere, do you? And he's like, no, you don't need to post it anywhere. So I thought that was a fair point that she made, because he wanted to give the jury the impression that it was just tossed aside. But I want to tell you what this Youth Handgun Safety Act notice tells us. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to read this thing because it's interesting. So, number 1, the misuse of handguns is a leading contributor to juvenile violence and fatalities. Safely storing and securing firearms away from children will help prevent the unlawful possession of handguns by juveniles, stop accidents, and save lives. Federal law prohibits, except in certain limited circumstances. In other words, you need it for your employment, maybe you're ranching or farming, or that's one of the circumstances. In any case, anyone under the age of 18 years of age from knowingly possessing a handgun, or any person from selling, delivering, or otherwise transferring a handgun to a person under 18. So, the fact that James Crumley bought his son a couple of handguns, not just one, but a couple, violates this Safety Act right there. And then number 4, a knowing violation of the prohibition against selling, delivering, or otherwise transferring a handgun to a person under the age of 18 is, under certain circumstances, punishable by up to 10 years in prison. Yeah. Now, that would be federal. See, we're in state court here in Michigan, so he's not been charged with a federal violation of this Youth Handgun Safety Act, but he has been, he's being charged in criminal court in the state for involuntary manslaughter, holding him responsible for the murder of those 4 children. So there's a difference. And whether he will ever be charged federally, I have no idea. But that would be interesting, wouldn't it? For violation of the Youth Handgun Safety Act. Interesting. We'll see what comes of that. In any case, I just wanted you to see that. So I mentioned that none of these weapons had been registered, but he said, the murder weapon, he still had time to register the murder weapon. And if you don't register a weapon, it's like this little tiny fine. It's not a big deal. So he said he had witnessed the video of the school shooting. I need a little sip of my coffee. You like my elephants? It's my favorite cup. I don't know who the manufacturer is of this, but it's a cool cup. Anyway, I digress. So his impression from watching the video of the school shooting, where he said, I have 3 impressions. The first one was that Ethan had some level of proficiency with this weapon. So when he took aim at Tate Mir, he actually got into a shooter stance where he, put his arms out and his shoulders forward and his legs a little bit apart. So he thought this showed some proficiency with the weapon. He also described that the shooter, Ethan Crumley, knew how to do a combat reload. And the third thing that caught his attention was when he came out of the bathroom after shooting Justin Schilling, he turned himself in. But before he did, he took the magazine out of the weapon and set the magazine separately from the weapon, which shows that, he's got some knowledge of safety, even though he left a round in the chamber. But in any case. So the other thing that this FBI agent did was contact different gun ranges in the area to see if James had ever been there with his son, Ethan. And he got footage from several of those gun ranges. On June 20th, there was a couple of videos that he found of James at the gun range. It was an outdoor gun range with Ethan. And the video was of Ethan shooting at this outdoor gun range. And that video was posted to social media by Jennifer, and her caption was, Ethan and James both got handguns this week. So this 6-hour 9mm apparently wasn't the first gun that he bought for his son. Anyway, then there was some videos that he showed where Ethan is showing off the Keltec weapon to his friend. And at the same time that those videos are being made and posted to Instagram, his father is in the same house as him, but there's no evidence that his father knew that he was unattended with a weapon. His father could have been standing there. Who knows? So that's his testimony, and he held up under cross. The defense attorney, she spends a lot of time just parroting the prosecution's testimony that's been elicited, which I get that that's a tactic, but it's annoying. Like, he just testified to all that. Why do you need him to repeat it? I don't get that. So you said this, and then you said that, and then you said this. Yeah. So yeah, I don't understand that tactic. It's not one that I would use. Like, just get to the point. If you have a question that's a really burning question after his prosecution testimony, ask your question. Why do you have to go through all that other nonsense? I don't get it. Anyway, that's where we left off for today. I don't know who's on the stand today. I haven't peeked. So I will see you tomorrow in Crafting and Crime Daily for an episode where I recap day 4. Have a great day, everybody. Bye.